Representative Rowe, if you could lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, if the members could introduce themselves, starting with Representative Hogan.
Portions of Lower Bucks County.
Good morning, David Rowe, representing the 5th Legislative District, Union, Snyder, Juniata, and Mifflin counties.
Good morning, everybody. Representative Tornecker. I represent parts of Adams and Cumberland County.
Representative Josh Kale, Beaver, Washington counties.
Representative Donna Shuren, and you are in my county, the 147th.
Hello, Kristen Marcel from the 178th District in Central Bucks County. Thank you.
John Lawrence, Southern Chester County.
All right, and it looks like we have Representative Smith joining us online. I still haven't quite gotten the hang of the virtual representatives being online virtually with us at the meetings. But they know what to do. If they want to ask a question, they just raise their little hand that shows up on there. But really, you want to text Dan and let him know you have a question. He'll get a hold of me to ensure that we do get your question and to ensure that you are heard. We have Representative Smith joining us virtually at this time. There probably will be others that come on as we go. Representative Shuren, I've enjoyed learning more about your district. Thank you for having us here. It's a beautiful area. If you'd like to make a few opening comments, then I'll make some brief opening comments and we can start this meeting.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all my colleagues for getting up early and coming to support me in this hearing today. Certainly, Chairman Gale will cover the main points of the discussion and our testifiers today. I thought it was important for the people who will be watching this video, as well as my colleagues, to hear a little bit more about this area, nicknamed the Indian Valley in the 147th, and why the committee is here today. This particular school district, Souderton, is very unique. We have a large number of senior citizens and veterans in the 147th district, which is wonderful. But at the same time, it brings to light the tax policies and the proposed budgeting for the 2024-2025 year and the significant impact that it's going to have on this particular region. Souderton is a district of firsts, and I say that sincerely in that they were the first school district called upon to testify in front of the Pennsylvania Senate for their successful governance and their methods of implementation of performance-based budgeting. They were one of the first to implement armed school police officers for the safety and security of the students and staff, one of the only schools across the Commonwealth to stay fully open through COVID, offering parents a choice of virtual education or in-person education, while many other districts, as we all know, are recovering from learning loss. Souderton was certainly able to nullify that in many ways by remaining open throughout COVID. And that's something that none of us should look over, and treat lightly. Because when push came to shove, they were willing to make the hard decisions during unknown times as to what it would take in order to make sure the students had as much in-person education as possible. And that included everything from hiring more staff to getting heaters, buying tents, buying disinfecting, antibacterial guns and canisters, removing everything from the classrooms except desks and a teacher in order to fulfill spacing requirements. So those times might be behind us, but I think all of us realize we're still feeling the effects of that. In addition, they're unique in that they're a district that came out publicly against critical race theory. They believe in parental involvement, and they also believe in age-appropriate curriculum. All the hot buttons that we continue to hear about today, they're a brave school district for being able to stand for their beliefs. They're also a district that believes in school choice, as they have a successful brick and mortar charter school in their district as well, but like all public schools, they advocate and continue to come to the Hill in order for fair funding to be achieved. I'm a strong advocate for local control, and in full disclosure, before running for state office, I served on this school board. Certainly our local officials, our elected officials in both township and school government are best equipped to make the decisions for what this community needs. The governor's budget and the education bill that was rushed through the House, the 87-page bill that my colleagues and I were not given any involvement or input on, no ability to make amendments as it was put through within 24 hours, has a lot of criteria to it. And we're here today for the main reason, and that Souderton is being penalized with $0 in this proposed budget for not taxing enough. And that statement seems to be rather outrageous and is worthy of further discussion. So if you spend more, then you're eligible to get more. And that's not something I think the seniors and the veterans and those already struggling in our community want to hear during inflationary times. And I think we need to shine a light on that. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, the conditions that the governor puts forth take a lot away from local control. Suggestions for methodologies to get your numbers up are to have minimum starting salaries of $60,000 for your teachers. And a broad mandate like that across the Commonwealth certainly takes away the ability of local government to decide what's best for their community and what they can afford. Lastly, ironically, the governor, Shapiro, was here on Friday, May 31st, just down the street at one of the senior centers in Souderton. And he was here to promote and unveil his Aging Our Way PA plan, which is to invest in the elderly through financial services, transportation, food, housing, among other things. But it missed the mark. Here he is touting that he's going to help the financial well-being of the seniors that live in this area, and at the same time, he's cutting the very funding they need to be able to afford their property taxes and stay in the home that they've lived in their whole life. Because when I talk to my constituents, that seems to be the number one priority. I want to be able to stay in my home, watch my grandchildren go to school, and afford where I've lived for 30, 40, or 50 years. So isn't that something? That didn't come up in the governor's tout of his new Aging Our Way PA plan. And he came to Souderton because of the high senior citizen base. This area, we might have had an uptick in some of our commercial industry in this district, but at the same time, all it did was lower us from the 80th percentile. It's still 75% funded by the residents of this community. And that leads us into the discussion as to why we're here. Responsible governance and leadership means something to the businesses and to the seniors of this community when elected officials stand up to try and support their residents through fiscal responsibility. And Mr. Chairman, I think these regions should be rewarded, not punished. So let's hear what these testifiers have to say.
Thank you, Representative. And we also have been joined by Representative Stir online. If you come on, just let us know. If you have a question, please let us know. Thank you for that introduction. It has been a whirlwind in Harrisburg over the course of the last couple of weeks. It seems like everything's been about taxes. We've had different proposals from education standpoint and the implications that's going to have on local property taxes. And of course, we had the state Senate pass the PIT tax cut, which we are advocating for as well, in the House of Representatives. And the implications of these proposals are vast. And what they could do in a good way and what they could do in a negative way is immense. And there are things that we need to talk about because the public fisc is a public trust. And it's our job as legislators to create as best we can an environment in this Commonwealth where our constituents can prosper. And these two issues that we're talking about here today, as far as competitiveness, as far as livability, they're the top issues. Schools, taxes, whether people want to move to an area, where they feel safe sending their kids, just critical issues. I'm excited to talk about both of them today. And we actually have two panels today. We have 5 testifiers. Thank you, Representative, for doing such a good job of organizing testifiers. The first panelist is analyzing the different tax proposals that we have in front of us in Harrisburg. Our first testifier is Andrew Holman, the policy analyst, the Commonwealth Foundation. Even though you did cut your hair, we'll still let you testify and go forward. You are an expert in your field, but we were looking forward to that flow. But anyway, our second testifier is Dr. Frank Gallagher. He's the superintendent of Souderton School District. Dr. Gallagher, thank you for being here. Mr. Holman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Kill, and thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak today. Before diving into the specifics of tax policy and the reforms outlined in Senate Bill 269 and House Bill 2388, I'd like to start with the larger vision. That is, the economic challenges that Pennsylvania faces, the solutions to these challenges, and the overall importance of making our state an economically competitive state. In short, our economy is stagnant due to burdensome regulation and an uncompetitive tax structure. And as a result of this, our state's young, skilled, working-age adults are leaving to other states in search of a lower cost of living, lower taxes, and better economic opportunity. Thankfully, other states have shown that tax reform is the best way to jumpstart an economy and make a state an attractive place to live and work. Now, a little more on the stagnant economy. Pennsylvania's official unemployment rate has been near record lows for months. That's good, but unfortunately, the labor force participation rate is still below where it was in January of 2020. We've also seen slow and stagnant job growth, an anemic 1% over the past 4+ years from February of 2020 to April of 2024. In comparison, low-tax, low-regulation states like Florida, Texas, and the Carolinas have seen job growth of more than 7% over the same time. So what does all of this mean for Pennsylvania? Perhaps the biggest consequence of this is outmigration. Our state's economic challenges are not new. In fact, because of our uncompetitive economy, we've suffered from net outmigration in 12 of the past 13 years. It's worth noting at a county level that Montco is actually one of the few seeing population growth from domestic migration, although it's not exactly clear if we're attracting people from Philadelphia or from other states. But overall, across the state, we're seeing tens of thousands of residents leaving for greener pastures in economically competitive states like North Carolina, Florida, and Texas. And worse yet, this outmigration is concentrated in younger, working-age adults, and this creates a brain drain that is a threat to both our fiscal and economic health. This is something I've seen firsthand. I grew up just down the street in Springmount, went to Perkiomen Valley High School, and a lot of my friends from high school and college who grew up here and went to school here have since left, and they're often going to Florida, North Carolina, and Texas. We actually did a poll on this a few months ago and found that over half of Pennsylvanians over the age of 30 know somebody who has or have themselves considered leaving the state. The most commonly cited reasons were lower cost of living, lower taxes, and better economic opportunity. And there are some fiscal implications of this as well. According to the IFO, our working age population is projected to continually fall this decade, resulting in a dependency ratio shift from 3.5 working adults per senior to 2.5. In the long run, this means fewer PIT collections, while some programs that serve seniors are expected to grow exponentially. So how do we fix this? We have to make Pennsylvania more competitive and more attractive to working-age families and employers via tax reform. Census data and IRS data show that residents across the country are leaving high-tax states in favor of low-tax states, and this plays out with what we're seeing in Pennsylvania. We're seeing people leave for Florida, the Carolinas, and Texas, while we're attracting people from New York, New Jersey, and California. And this demonstrates that tax burden, particularly with the income tax, is closely linked to economic growth and migration. In fact, the 8 states with no income tax are consistently among the fastest growing. And as such, other states have been pursuing tax cuts to become more competitive. Already this year, 14 states, both red states like North Carolina and blue states like Connecticut, have cut their personal income tax rate. Now, Senate Bill 269 and House Bill 2388 propose reducing the income tax rate from 3.07% to 2.8% beginning in January of 2025. This returns the rate to where it was in 2003 before Governor Rendell's tax increase. And under this proposal, we would levy the 10th lowest rate, which actually includes states with no income tax. It's worth noting we have not reduced our income tax since 1986, and reducing the personal income tax rate will also benefit small businesses. Most small businesses operate as pass-through entities, which essentially means that the owners are reporting the business income on their personal taxes. The bills also propose eliminating the gross receipts tax on electricity. This shows up as a surcharge on bills, and reducing this will help reduce costs for homeowners, renters, businesses, and consumers. In the first year of implementation, we actually estimate that the average household in Montgomery County would see a savings of about $789. To wrap it all up, Pennsylvania is failing to compete with other states due to burdensome regulations and an uncompetitive tax structure. Other, more economically competitive states like Florida, Texas, and the Carolinas are taking our residents. Combined with an aging population, outmigration can and will present serious fiscal challenges in the future if left unaddressed. We have to reverse this trend by beginning to keep our working age population here and start attracting residents from other states, and tax reform has proven to be the most effective way to do this. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Doctor.
Oh, the brighter green. My name is Frank Gallagher, and I've been superintendent in the Souderton Area School District for 12 years. Souderton educates 6,300 students in 9 buildings across 49 square miles, encompassing 6 municipalities. Superintendents and school boards across the Commonwealth appreciate the challenge of finding enough money in the state budget to properly fund our public schools. There are many priorities. Public education is just one of them. We recognize that the Governor and the General Assembly are facing pressure to change the funding structure after the Commonwealth Court declared the way public schools are funded in Pennsylvania is unconstitutional. Every year, public education is asked to do more, to provide more supports, with very little additional funding. In legislative circles, that is known as unfunded mandates, and it's coming at us from both the state and federal governments. Let me give you one example. When the federal special education law was passed into law in the 1970s, it included a 40% funding share for the costs associated with educating children with special needs. Over the last 50 years, the federal share of that funding has never reached 40%. In fact, it's hovered around 11%. State mandates have also placed a strain on public schools. One of the largest is the funding of cyber charter schools, some of the very lowest performing schools in Pennsylvania. Cyber charter schools spend millions on elaborate advertising campaigns. They are not held to the same standards as traditional public schools. The private companies that own some of these schools are making millions in revenue. Reports have shown that Pennsylvania's charter school law and funding system is among the worst in the nation. Even Chairman Topper said it is time for a change. It is truly time for change. House Bill 1422 begins the process of changing the state's charter school law to establish a cap on cyber charter school tuition at $8,000, aligning the tuition rate with actual costs. It also includes a formula to accurately reflect the cost of educating a child who qualifies for special education services. Currently, the law charges one tuition rate regardless of the student's identified disability. If passed, this change is estimated to save school districts in Pennsylvania $262 million in cyber charter tuition every year. In Montgomery County, public school districts would save nearly $41 million each year. In Souderton, the savings would be about $610,000 each year. This reform is desperately needed in our state. The only residents who would lose out are the CEOs of these poorly performing online schools. Today, I also need to share the impact of the adequacy gap and the tax equity provision in the proposed state budget. Pennsylvania has a long history of using complicated formulas to fund its public schools. In January, the state's Basic Education Funding Commission issued a report indicating that there is a $5.4 billion funding adequacy gap for schools across the state, meaning the state is actually underfunding its schools by $5.4 billion. The report also said that $291 million of the $5.4 billion is, quote, the local responsibility of low tax effort school districts. The remaining $5.1 billion rests upon the state. But here's the kicker. That $291 million would be paid by only 75 school districts out of the state's 500. Which 75? The ones deemed by the Commonwealth as undertaxing their communities. Essentially, this is a penalty to school districts that have worked hard to keep taxes low. Pennsylvania knows that the way it provides funding to its public school districts needs to change, but the solution in the proposed budget penalizes 75 school districts. Souderton Area School District is one of 14 districts in Montgomery County that will not qualify for the adequacy funding or tax equity payments from the state. Instead, we will be expected to make up any future budget increases by raising local taxes, far more than we typically would do so. Over 8 of the last 10 years, we have kept our tax increases below the state Act 1 index. Had we taken those increases to the Act 1 limit, we may have qualified for additional state funding as part of the new tax equity formula. If the new formula passes, instead, we will have to turn to our own residents and say to them, sorry, Souderton, we've budgeted carefully, but now that is going to cost you money. We are being forced to raise our taxes because we are one of 75 school districts across the Commonwealth that have been identified as ones that did not. Ones who adequately tax our local residents enough to support the education of its young people. I am asking that the General Assembly consider providing an allocation for the 75 school districts that have been able to keep taxes low during the Act 1 era. This is not the way to fix our funding problems. At a bare minimum, this budget needs to include provisions for cyber charter school savings and for reimbursement of excess special education costs. While that may not be part of the tax equity consideration, it will help to offset some of the biggest cost drivers in our budgets. No testimony on public education will be complete without addressing the why. Pennsylvania's brick and mortar public schools are among the best in the nation, despite the inadequacy of public funding. We provide robust, dynamic, impactful education for an extremely wide range of students, from children with significant needs to those who are extremely accelerated. I invite you to come to our schools, spend a day with me walking through our classrooms. The education of our children is essential to our success, and our taxpayers should not be penalized for the fact that we have worked hard to fund that education in a very responsible way. Thank you for your consideration and your deliberate, a very difficult and challenging budget.
Representative Sherm.
Dr. Gallagher, thank you very much for not only your thorough testimony, but also the passion that you convey. It is clearly evident how much you care and believe in your schools and stand for all the success that you, your administration, your cabinet, and your board have achieved over the 12 years that you have served as the superintendent. No doubt, the district has a number of challenges and the intelligence to think outside the box in order to make it an affordable district for so many years under your reign. I can appreciate your statements that without being rewarded for methodology that maybe other school districts could learn from Souderton in their approach to budgeting, the governor has chosen to penalize you. My question goes to an area that wasn't necessarily focused on in your testimony, simply because you covered your perspective so well. And it'll go to Mr. Holman as well when I'm done. In all the budget line items that the district is responsible for, one of the areas that I also ran on and have been fighting to advocate an increase is tech school education. So Souderton is fortunate enough to have their tech school right down the street and share with 5 sending schools, I believe, as well. And so in addition to everything in the unfunded mandates with regards to special education, which is not new to many on this panel, what would you also like to see in the area of increased funding for tech school, which will then lead into my question for Mr. Holman in regards to keeping people here in our state to make it more competitive.
So the 5 sending districts to North Monco Technical Career Center include North Penn, Satterton, Perk Valley, Wissahickon, and Methacton. And we've made a conscious effort, the 5 superintendents, to really market the Technical Career Center as an excellent choice for 9 through 12 education. We've added programs that are new. Megatronics is a huge, successful program. We just added another program this year on building management, another trade to be property managers. We have a waiting list. Every district has a waiting list of students. One of our challenges there is facility. We are landlocked, and we cannot add on to the building any further. We could add up, which that cost of adding second floor is quite expensive. So we are finding ways to utilize the building, repurposing spaces. But that's the biggest challenge right now, is making enough room for all the students who want to go to the North Monco Technical Career Center. This is a good problem. This is a good problem to have. We have lots of students who want to go into trades, and I follow them after graduation, and they're doing well in their careers, whether it's an auto technician. Have you called your plumber lately for something? My plumber is a graduate of Technical Career Center, and I'm always impressed by not just his plumbing skills, because I have zero, but his business skills. So it's a good problem to have, but waiting list and finding enough space.
Fair enough. And then staying on that same topic, the only, what I wanted to focus on in some of your testimony, you were saying about your research, the polls, and going to school right down the street in Perk Valley. With regards to what it would take for the youth to stay in Pennsylvania and capitalize on opportunities, did any of that research relate itself to specific job careers, or was it just more general in nature?
It was definitely more general in nature, but the 3 themes that were consistently coming up were better economic opportunity, lower cost of living, and then lower taxes on top of it. It helps when you can keep more of your paycheck, spend less of it to live there, and then obviously have good job opportunities and career opportunities.
Imagine that, Mr. Chairman, wanting to keep more of what you earned. Rocket science right there. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Eckert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, folks, for testifying and being here today. Something that I think we don't lose focus on, but when we talk about education and funding and everything, is that we need to focus, again, on what is the most important thing with education, that's students, right? Educating our children. And I think we all agree up here that the Commonwealth Court has told us that we need to figure out a new method to fund our schools. But essential to that is, in making those decisions, is focusing on how does it improve student learning. And I'm curious, from a district who clearly has managed its budget and managed its finances well over the years and educated students, what measures, what accountability measures, what things should we be looking at as policymakers to ensure that more funding that's going to the school is going to student success? How can we, from a state level, ensure student accountability, or accountability, so that students are performing better in schools, and not necessarily put strings, but maybe there are strings attached to it. How do we incentivize schools to focus on student success, and, like you guys, looking at doing ways that don't necessarily mean more money, or there could be more money, but you are doing a lot with a little. How do we encourage other school districts to do that and focus on student success and accountability? You both could focus on that, but Dr. Gallagher, yeah.
Across the Commonwealth, superintendents often collaborate on this very topic. So what's different is our different regions in the Commonwealth, different economies, different demographics. That's where things are different. One of the challenges, quite frankly, is the PSSA testing. Takes way too long. It's not an accurate test of what's done in what school is. That costs a lot of money. That's a big cost driver for the Commonwealth budget. We're testing from grades 3 through 8, language arts, math, and science. We don't really use that information much. We use the assessments that we give in school that are standardized, that are nationally standardized tests. We give them 3 times a year. We report out to the public how we're doing. That also shows us where we have to work on growth. But one of the biggest challenges right now, and what I would urge the legislature, is to focus on the whole child. So get data points that focus on the growth of the whole child. So academics obviously is critical, but also mental health, behaviors, attendance. Attendance has been a bit of a challenge after the pandemic because kids got used to staying home, just like workers did. And a lot of people did not want to come back full time. We've been luckier in Souderton in that case because we did open up in the fall of 2020. We did a 2-week phase-in, and then we were open, social distancing and all. And I had a lot of challenges from the county government because I opened. But my suggestion would be look at the whole child data points. And some of that is done now on the state level, but I think it's also looking at walkthroughs of the building, seeing what's happening in classrooms. There's a lot of misunderstandings of what's happening in schools today. If I have to answer to one more person that we do not have litter boxes in our bathrooms, for how many times I had to answer that, if I had $10,000 for every time, I'd be a multimillionaire. So there's a lot happening in schools, and I would urge, and I know you probably do this, go visit your schools or visit schools outside of your district. I love to visit schools outside of our region. But Montgomery County, we're a tight group. We have different perspectives sometimes, but we work together on what's the best solution.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I agree that student testing is not necessarily the only factor that should be considered. And I'm glad you raised some of the other issues, because I think there are other things, and I'm glad you highlighted a few others that we need to be focused on as well. Because testing it is a factor. I think that it's something you can look at, but it's also, there are other things I think we need to be focusing on accountability as well. So I appreciate you sharing some of those insights. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Marcel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much to the testifiers for being here today. And also thank you to Representative Shurin for hosting us in your beautiful district and beautiful building here. I had some questions. One is a little bit of a follow-up from Representative Ecker's question. But Mr. Holman, you talked about the aging population, obviously, of our state, and how, at a certain point that's going to be a problem from a revenue perspective, and being able to maintain the budget that we're in budget negotiations in the next week or so. And so as we're considering the future and future budgets, obviously that aging population and the workforce that we are able to either attract to Pennsylvania or keep here is going to be so important. I believe, I previously was on a school board just like Representative Shurin, and I really believe that education is key to our state being able to be competitive, and that is really going to help us to be able to thrive, to help our Commonwealth be what it needs to be. And so I wanted to first start with really a follow-up from Representative Ecker's question. So are there areas within the budget where we potentially could have more funding that would help us to have better student outcomes? I know in my district, I hear a lot about reading support and literacy. I have heard a lot about CTE funding. We have wait lists at every one of our tech schools in Bucks County, and we've been trying to figure out ways to again, help people to be successful, help students that want to be in those career technical education programs. And so that's my first question, is just, are there any areas of funding that you see as being the best ways to help with student outcomes? Thank you.
Yeah, just to be quite honest, education policy is not really my area of expertise, but I'm happy to talk to somebody on the team and follow up with you on that.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned literacy, and I know, I don't know if it's in the House, but there is a bill to address literacy, and districts need to adopt a program that's comprehensive, that's follows the science of reading. Souderton has had a long history of a rich literacy program, but our program was out of the Teachers College of Columbia University, and the program is no longer supported. No longer staff development supported, the materials are no longer printed, so it's time for it was time for us to look at a new comprehensive reading program. So we have looked at several. We had a committee, and we are choosing Houghton Mifflin into reading. It's a classic, reading program with all the bells and whistles, as they say. We started the staff development for that the day after school. We had 50 teachers involved in that. We are going to have it in some classrooms in every elementary building in the 2 middle schools this coming year, and then the next year fully implement it. To fully implement it, it's over $1 million. Now, my cabinet, because they're fiscally responsible, do a great job negotiating with these big companies. So it's usually spread out over a couple years. But if there's any money associated with that bill, that would be terrific. Back in the day when I was an administrator in Bucks County and a teacher, I worked in the Centennial School District in Warminster. I was a teacher and then an administrator before I came to Souderton at an elementary school that used to be right up the road. I was principal, Lower Salford Elementary. We had a program from the state called Read to Succeed. It was, who was the governor after Rendell? Corbett. Yep. What's that? I heard you. His administration implemented Read to Succeed, and it was a yearly grant to help with this very type of project. So something like that would definitely offset our local tax dollars.
Thank you very much. I believe that our colleague, Representative Ortiz, is the sponsor of the literacy bill that you mentioned, and so hopefully we'll be seeing some action on that. My follow-up question is, I know Representative Ecker had talked about standardized testing. Obviously, there are some pros and cons of that, but are there any performance standards, Dr. Gallagher, that you think might be helpful if we're trying to look at more so failing or struggling school districts, some benchmarks or some ways to help them to be? Obviously, Souderton is very different than some of the schools, particularly in Philadelphia. And so are there any ways to help them to either have benchmarks or standards maybe similar to some things that you've seen?
Souderton is even different within its own boundaries. That's what's so unique about this community. You have 113 is the main corridor that cuts through the whole community. You have Harleysville and Lead Rock, very different demographics than Souderton Borough and Telford Borough. So one challenge we had, and we embraced these challenges, is we had a significant increase in ELL, English language learners. A lot of that is due to the industry in this area. The meatpacking industry is huge in this area. We have Clemens Food Group, otherwise known as Hatfield. We have Mopac, or with the largest meatpacking plant on this side of the Mississippi. It's in our district. A lot of their employees are immigrants, documented immigrants, I believe. And they bring their children, and their children are delightful. They're not behavior problems. They want to learn, but it's required us to hire several new staff members to have the EL certificate. The best way for them to learn is to be immersed immersion program in the regular classroom. We've seen a huge success this year at Franconia Elementary with that. So I think the challenge is in getting students to achieve, it's really the school and the families working together. And in some urban centers, that's not always happening. There's a lot of social issues that are happening within particularly urban centers. I talked to my colleagues in Pottstown and Norristown, even the School District of Philadelphia. It's a very different landscape. But I just know what we do in Sourton. In one school, that's a Title I whole school program with 60% are free and reduced lunch, versus what I do at Salford Hills, which is about 10% free and reduced lunch. And all those demographics do add to challenges in students being ready to learn. Not wanting to learn, but being ready to learn. And there is, back to literacy, the one thing I do not agree with is children who aren't reading at grade level by third grade should be failed or held back. Developmentally, that would not be appropriate. That just wouldn't be appropriate. We just have to find a way to intervene for those children, whether it's a summer school program, after school program, that type of thing.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Rowe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Holman, I'm sure at some point you've read Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, where he talks about the fallacy of government spending as a sustainable driver for economic growth. So my question is very basic. The governor's proposal is $3 billion in new spending paid for by the taxpayers. Our proposal is to give $3 billion back to the taxpayers in the form of tax cuts. So what is the long-term impact of that? Is there any? And what is the difference between $3 billion in new spending for temporary projects or $3 billion in permanent tax cuts to the people of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, just to start the difference between the $3 in temporary spending versus the $3 billion to the taxpayers. With the taxpayers, you're going to see it reinvested in the economy. If there's a small business owner who's paying less in taxes, that's going to mean more benefits for employees, higher wages for employees. Maybe expands his business and opens a new location, hires 10 more employees. So you definitely see the benefit in that. And then beyond that, just kind of the overall fiscal responsibility. It's important right now, especially with the aging and out-migrating population, that we really control spending, put guardrails on spending, and make sure that we're not spending more than we can afford. And that'll prevent tax increases in the future, which, you don't want to be increasing taxes.
And what happens when you do see that taxing? What happens if, this reinvestment in our economy through letting the private sector do it, right, versus $3 billion in spending that the governor wants to spend down? And these are not recurring funds, right? The governor likes to perpetually say it's a surplus. A surplus indicates there's recurring revenues. These are not recurring revenues. Once these federal dollars that came down before are spent, they're gone forever. So then if we do have $3 billion in new spending and new programs that have to be backfilled, what does that mean for Pennsylvania's tax climate going forward?
It means it's going to get a lot worse, and you've seen it in places like California and Illinois where they didn't control spending, and they're facing some of the similar problems that we are with the out-migration. But theirs is magnified because they already have very high tax rates, and they don't have the revenue to pay for their programs, so they increase the tax rate even more, shrink the base even more, and more people leave. And it kind of snowballs from that point.
Well, thank you very much, and I think that's an important material point. Piggybacking off of what my good colleague Representative Marcel pointed out, that we do have a lot of seniors in Pennsylvania who rely on a lot of social programs that these working people in Pennsylvania end up providing for. And if those working people leave Pennsylvania, those social programs aren't going to be there for the people who need them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions before I ask a few and then move on to the next? Do you have a question? All right. Vice Chairman Eckert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just looking, and Mr. Holman, this is for you. I'm looking at the chart you provided here on page 4, the migration gain and loss. I'm just kind of curious looking at this. Obviously, for those at home, there's every year for the last 13 years has seen significant out migration. I'm wondering, the outlier there is 2021. What is that COVID related? What's going on there?
Not 100% sure. Our best guess is that it's COVID related. People moving back home just to be with their family during that time.
Yeah, and if you look at the chart, I mean, it was a pretty precipitous rise. I mean, we're looking, it's over, 40,000, over 25 to 30,000 people every year, and it's that are moving out of Pennsylvania, and they're moving to states. I think that's important to note, and some of the maps you provided to states with good tax policy in the South, Texas. And it's interesting where some of our migration in is moving from states where tax policy is not great, like California, New York, New Jersey. So I think it demonstrates, and I appreciate the maps and the statistics, it demonstrates that good tax policy, people vote with their feet, people will move to places that have good places for their families through tax policy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I even saw this in my neighborhood over the past year. We had a new neighbor moved down to Florida, sold their house. The family that moved in was from New Jersey. And that's pretty much just how it's been playing out over the past couple of years.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, anybody else? I do have a quick question. I'm curious. We talk about tax policy, and we talk about it from an umbrella standpoint. Lower taxes means more investment, means people coming to the state, higher taxes. Do the opposite, and you see that in places like California and so on and so forth. But I'm curious, the difference in how we tax and what the implications are as far as competitiveness and migration numbers and things of that nature. Today we're talking about really two separate tax structures, but it's the same people that are getting taxed, right? The people in your district will be paying a lower PIT if this PIT goes through, but they'll also be paying higher property taxes because of the governor's plan. So they'll gang one place and lose on the other place because of how this is all going. Is there any indication, Mr. Holman, as to PIT as opposed to property taxes, or is it just generally keeping all taxes low? Is one tax more favorable for a competitive market as opposed to another?
Yeah, I think the overall importance is making sure that you have a friendly tax structure that's not taking too much money from people. But I think the biggest impact, particularly with migration, we see it with no income tax. The three fastest growing states, Florida, Texas, North Carolina. Florida and Texas do not have state income tax, and North Carolina has been consistently lowering theirs since 2013.
Yeah, and so they do have property tax. Like that's how they pay for schools and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is it locally done? Not sure.
Yeah, not sure on that one.
Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming here. Thank you for testifying. If there's any other questions, otherwise we will move on to the second panel. We've also been joined by Representative Tim Twardzik. We have a great crowd with us online today as well as here in person. So our second panel is the Real World Impact Panel. Not that you guys weren't real world. You guys are feeling it too. But our second panel is the Honorable Chris Canavan, the President, WB Homes and Supervisor, Lower Sulphur Township. Wendell Weaver, Vice President, Alderfer Glass Company, and the Honorable Keith Freed, tax collector here at Franconia Township. All right. Usually I mess somebody's name up, so we'll see. All right, gentlemen. Mr. Canavan, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me. Donna, thank you very much for inviting me. As noted, I am a township supervisor in Lower Salford Township, so welcome to our beautiful community. I would note the shield hanging behind you has our community saying, Gemeinschaft. And for those of you who are not up on your Pennsylvania Dutch, or loosely translated, that means community. And it strikes me after listening to the testimony heard today and the questions asked, much of what we're talking about is community, and how do you build a strong and vibrant community and making sure you're able to take care of your senior population while still sustaining your workforce. As noted, I am the president of WB Homes. We are an $85 million revenue company. We are a local home builder and land developer throughout much of southeastern Pennsylvania. We employ directly 53 employees, and on any given day, we have over 100 trade partners and all of their employees building our homes for us. We are directly impacted by the quality of the workforce that is educated through our schools. I will note that I'm very proud of the fact that my oldest son graduated last year from North Monco Technical Career Center. He is a carpenter, and he has done very well. He had a very competitive process to get into that program, and they could have doubled or tripled the size of that program, but they don't have space or teachers. So from the discussion we're having today, it is critical that we look at a balanced tax policy that supports where education needs to go for the workforce we need, which I think the technical careers, as anybody has read, especially young men have found that the college education is no longer the path they need to pursue, and technical education is a much better path for many of them. Not all of them. My second son just graduated and is heading to Shippensburg for mechanical engineering. So each path is their own for children. And, but we need to be able to provide those assets, and the community needs to support that. From the standpoint of the personal income tax reduction, I think it was noted very well. We are a company that is owned solely by William and Janet Bonneberger. They are, so all of our revenues, all of our taxes roll through to a personal income tax somewhere. If that money is not being taxed, that money is going back into our next investment, our next land development, our next opportunity to build homes, our next opportunity to hopefully help people achieve the American dream of home attainability. The tax policy does have a direct impact on attainability. Obviously, inflation has seen a huge increase in the cost to buy a home, particularly in southeastern Pennsylvania. That has been a ripple effect through the cost of inputs, the cost of land, the cost of interest rates. And if you continue to tax on top of that and not have a fair school tax policy, that's the tax that everybody looks at when they're looking to buy a home. How much am I going to pay in my real estate taxes? It's not our local township tax, county tax, sort of school district tax. So balancing that so that there's a fair and equitable way to fund that helps with the discussion of housing attainability. And I know we only have 2 or 3 minutes, so I'm going to try to wrap this up into the community discussion of what concerns me. At work, we need to have skilled labor that is willing to work close to where we are. That is people who are making $25 an hour, $28 an hour, $32 an hour. They need homes. They need places they can raise their children. And we need to be able to make sure that they can live and work near where they are. As a township supervisor, I worry about the same thing. We have a wonderful group of volunteer responders at the local Harleysville Fire Company, which you can see right outside these windows. We're blessed with the fact that most of the officer corps in that volunteer fire company is in their 20s. They need homes to move to. And if they can't afford to stay within the community in which they grew up, they're going to move elsewhere, and their skill set as a volunteer firefighter is going to be great for another community, but it's not going to be here. And we need to make sure that we have the opportunity for those people to stay within their area. So appropriate tax policy, whether it's a reduction with their personal income tax so they have more money in their pocket, or a fair and balanced school district taxes, doesn't solve it, but is one of the items that helps to maintain the appropriate balance of our population and create that sense of community that I think we are all looking for in our local area. Thank you.
Mr. Freed? Mr. Weaver, whichever one.
I'll go. Wendell Weaver. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I represent small business, Alderfer Glass, and as by the notes I had given there, we started in 1961, and I was second generation in the family, and my 2 sons have now taken over the business, and they are third generation, roughly 90 employees, and work out of this community right here. And the comment that I make is employees and retirees continue to suffer from the high cost of living and the high costs of COVID, that we experienced. Our payroll has been pushed up because of those high costs. I mean, we're trying to keep our payroll high enough that people can live in our area. And we experience the pay increase just happened, and we experienced the complaints and people feeling they're not making enough, and we're high. I think we need smart policies. We need to reduce costs wherever we can. As an employer, working from that, higher costs in payroll pushes up our workman's comp. Labor's hard to find, and we're paying more to bring them on board to work at our place. And our workforce is aging. The young people coming onto the workforce, as we talked about with trade schools, it's an aging group. Healthcare continues to be a burden for an employer. That continues to go up. High price of houses in the area. The houses have gone extremely high in our area, and people that work for us can't afford almost to live here because of the high prices. A lot of them drive in from the north to work for us. Dual incomes in our area are almost a must. Someone on their own can't hardly make it. Stiffer regulations, WB Homes can talk about that, but building projects, the costs are driven up from regulations. We experience small businesses coming in from other communities that don't have the costs that we do. One example would be the Lancaster area. A lot of people coming in from that area to work in our area, in our line of work. Sales projections, we talk about, they're hard to know how that's going to go. We had major increases in electric costs, utility costs, things that really going up in the COVID years, and then past that, it continues to rise. I talk about the insurance costs have gone up. Fleet costs are higher than they were before. Gas is up. The infrastructure that we feel is around us now since COVID, I think, is less reliable. Power outages, phone outages, long wait times. We're feeling like it's hard to be doing business. I think to end it though, I think as a business owner, relief is what we need. I mean, we need to see relief on any area just because it'll help drop the costs in what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Freed. 2 mics.
Good morning. My name is Keith Freed. I'm currently the Franconia Township elected tax collector. I was previously a Franconia Township supervisor. I'm a resident of Franconia Township in the Saturn Area School District. I want to speak today about the impact of the property taxes as I collect property taxes for both the county township and also the school district. Franconia Township is 14 square miles, approximately 13,260 residents. It's a very rural community. We have 30 preserved farms, very similar demographics to what we have here in Lower Salford. We're very proud of the preserved farms and what that has done. The state has supported that, the county supported that. However, that also means there's no additional growth or additional revenues coming out of those areas. So that's one of the beauties of living here, but also as long-term growth continues to fund some of this stuff, we're not going to have that availability. The burden of the Saturn area school taxes on the residents, they're hit in a couple different ways. The one is their property tax. The current millage rate is 32.7, which was a 4.1% increase from last year. The new taxes coming out July 1st, they're currently talking about an additional 5.3% increase. There's also a per capita tax, which is $10 per resident. There's an earned income tax of 1%, which is split 50-50 between the township and the school district. And I got the township numbers. Last year, that grew 6.5%, so it would have also grown for the school district. There's also a property transfer tax, which is split between the school district and the township. Unfortunately, due to the high interest rates, due to the inflation, due to the things we've talked about in the economy, last year, that was a huge negative. The property transfer tax, which again goes to the township and goes to school, was 36.8% less last year. It was 351,000 compared to 556,000, a $204,000 just gone because of the economy. So again, as the economy, as all these burdens are on everybody, the school district has to look to make up those revenues. Franconia Township is one of 6 municipalities in the school district. Again, we're very similar to Lower Salford. We have 4,787 parcels, of which 4,200 are homes. They are the households. They're the ones that are paying the taxes. You can see there's not a large gap. We do not have a large industrial group in here that is helping to support the property taxes. We are the second largest in Franconia, and of the school taxes that are collected in the Saturn Area School District, last year it was $94 million. Franconia was responsible for $27 million of that. Again, we're the second largest. Lower Salford is similar. The school tax is the largest burden for all of our residents. It's 4.3 times the amount of the local and county taxes. I will share with you my personal property tax. My personal property is taxed at $360,000. It has an appraised value of $367,000. My county township taxes were $2,700. My school taxes were $11,600. Okay, and that's saying a district that's undertaxed. I'm a senior, just like everyone else. I'm a part-time job as a tax collector. But when you talk about school tax at 11.6 and you put a 5% increase on that, that's huge. And again, last year it was a 4.1% increase. So we are under a huge tax burden. The other thing is the aging population. I spoke about me being a senior. We are very proud, and like the communities, in Franconia Township alone, which again is just 1/6 of the district, 30%, we have 55 and older communities. We have Hidden Springs, which is 253 units. We have Harrington Village, which is 120 units. We have Lions Gate, which is 156 units. We have Kingsfield, which is 66 units. And we have Indian Valley Greens, which is 96 units. In addition to that, I have 2 home campuses that go all the way from independent living to personal care. I have the Saturn Mennonite Home, which has 410 residents, and I have the Peter Becker Community, which has 510 residents. Again, that is just one synopsis in Franconia Township of our aging population. On both the homes, they don't pay market value assessment for real estate taxes because of some court cases. They pay what's called tax in lieu of. So even though we have those large populations with the large campuses, they have a negotiated tax that they pay to the local township and also the school district. One of the other taxes that Saturn has used, and we as tax collectors think this is really a nuisance tax, is the per capita tax. I spoke about how the school district is collecting $94 million collectively from a group. Of that $94 million, the per capita tax is only $333,000. Now, the school district taxes every resident over the age of 18. As soon as they turn 18, the school district has the information. They put a $10 tax on that person. Okay? This started in 1965, and it's still there. Souderton is one of 2 school districts that still has it, Souderton and Pottstown. There's no others in Montgomery County. Talk about a burden on a resident. I have residents in Souderton Home and Peter Becker. Some are over 100 years old. Some are in dementia units. They're in health care. They're on hospice. They get a $10 tax a year. I get a phone call saying, why are you taxing this person? What are you doing? Again, $330,000. It's 3.5% of what we collect. Yet the school district has that tax in place. Every time we go to them, their answer is, I can't afford to give up the revenue because it was already there. They don't want to go backwards. But the burden, people in over 100 years old, I get phone calls every time we send tax bills out from people saying, how dare you send me a tax bill? My child passed away. You're reminding me of this. For the amount of tax that we pay and property and everything else, to have a tax like that the school district feels necessary because there's not the proper funding for them is just a shame in our community. People over 100 years old have paid taxes most of their life. They're in a community, they're in healthcare, whatever. They shouldn't be burdened with what I would classify as a nuisance tax. When the school district gets questioned, again, they don't have the revenue. We certainly need to do something to take the funding formula for the Saturn Area School District and look at that and increase that so we can get some of these burdens off some of the residents. There is an area that I think there's an opportunity for taxes, and that's the homestead tax credit. On every tax bill, that shows up. The homestead tax credit, I believe, is funded through the PA Gaming Commission. We were at a seminar a while back where they told us where that was. I understand with the sports betting, with all the additional revenues that are coming in, there should be additional funding there. However, the tax credit has been static. Last year in the Staterton School District in 2022, the homestead credit was $257.15. Last year, it went up to $257.81, a 66-cent increase in the Homestead Reduction Act. Now, from a optics standpoint, if you look at this, this is a credit that shows up on every tax bill that the school district sends out every single year. You talk about giving tax relief, you talk about looking, how can we help someone? This is visual. This shows what you're working for. So there is an opportunity there. That is the one area when I get seniors coming in to pay, and I get a couple hundred each time my office is open before discount. They're always complaining. They're asking for senior discounts. I had a lady argue with me that she even gets a senior discount at Taco Bell. How come she can't get a senior discount on her taxes? They read in the AARP magazines where there's other states that once they hit a certain age, their taxes are frozen and things like that, but not in Pennsylvania. Again, every time tax bill goes out, I get asked what it is. I think the funding formula needs to be looked at, and I certainly hope that through some of these hearings and as we analyze some of the different revenue streams, that it can be fair throughout Pennsylvania and we don't continue to put the burden on our thing. I previously mentioned that the area is very rural. When you talk about lowering the gross receipts tax on electric, I think that would be tremendous. Being rural areas that we're in, there's not a lot of natural gas, so everything is electric. That certainly puts a burden on all of our residents, so if we could get that lowered and get that taken care of, that again would have a major impact on everything. I certainly look forward to any tax relief for our struggling residents, whether they be employed or on a fixed income. If property taxes could stabilize without increase through the proper funding formula, lower electricity bills, and reduce personal income tax, it would be a welcome relief for all of us in these difficult economic times. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Sherm.
Well, there certainly was a lot in all of that. Thank you, Mr. Freed, Mr. Weaver, and Mr. Canavan. Each of you touched on aspects that relate to your industry and your part-time profession. Just as I said to Dr. Gallagher, there's a lot of passion, and certainly we ended with Mr. Freed's stats, figures, and thank you for coming so prepared with so much information. Very valuable. I'm going to try to hit on all three of you, and we'll see if the question is marketable across all your testimony. Everything you said here today opens up a lot of talking points that myself and my colleagues would like to fight for in Harrisburg. We are certainly very anxious to be able to control the docket again at some future date, to be able to address, in particular, Mr. Freed, the homestead tax rebate. you hit on something that as certain industries are successful within the state of Pennsylvania that contribute to the funding model, it's a valid question to ask. As gaming and those industries climb in revenue, the 61 cents certainly does seem almost insulting, right, as far as what the increase in the rebate is for the seniors in this community. This policy hearing focuses on a cut, right, to the personal income tax as well as the gross receipts tax on the utilities. This panel also believes in expanding the natural resources in Pennsylvania for them to be able to benefit the people in this Commonwealth that are blessed with those resources underground. In addition, we also believe in getting our people back to work. We also believe in affordability for people to stay where they reside. With all that being said, last week, this hearing addressed, shall we say, the levels of fraud that exist in the state of Pennsylvania as far as those that are on our welfare rolls, Medicare rolls, and the able-bodied working males from the age of 20 to 40 that are capable of entering the workforce again, but instead are still sitting on our welfare rolls. The numbers are staggering to the tune of $1.5 billion that we would be able to eliminate, enforcing policies to be driven into effect with simple questions and qualifying data that would make room actually for the 14,000 people that are on the waiting list that deserve to be on those particular roles and getting assistance. Therefore, if we're able to address fraud and expand the money that is available to put back into the programs to go in the areas that the three of you discussed, affordable housing, a break on the taxes, a workforce that can live where they want to work, I do believe these requests would be formidable and capable. What I'd like your input on, in particular, from the business community in an effort to help the seniors, we fought for larger incentives for the EITC tax credit. Do either of you benefit from your benefits? Certainly the school districts benefit when businesses are able to get larger tax credits for investing in the local schools, and to be able to take that off their, bottom line for the business. And more so in working with my various research committees back in Harrisburg, I believe it is also a very valuable tool, and the bill that I'm working on would allow businesses to be able to capitalize in the hopes of growing our tech schools. Dr. Gallagher mentioned in his testimony about being landlocked. If we were able to offer even more incentives for businesses to expand whatever footprint they have within their buildings or their facilities, to expand the trades, do you see opportunities in this area for that to happen? So I'll start with you, Mr. Weaver, since your sons are third generation taking over the glass industry, and your thoughts on the EITC as well as utilizing business to expand trades.
I know that I utilized EITC as I was in the business, and both my sons have utilized it, and I think it's a good thing for schools. I mean, they get to use their money to go to where they wanted to go. And the trade schools, I mean, I always say we kind of missed a generation. We told everybody they had to go to college. And, my boys went to college, but they worked with me when they were around in the summertime. And so they know the trades, but they did go to college. But we have a whole generation that didn't take up the trades. So we have a lot of, we have to gain a lot of ground. We have to really work on that part to fill those roles.
echoing my colleague's comment, and yes, the EITC program is critical, I think, to helping to continue to grow those programs and be an opportunity to develop the necessary public partnership that's necessary for those areas to be successful and to make sure the programs that are being introduced are directed towards where the industries actually need the future programs. Dr. Gallagher mentioned the property maintenance program, mentioned the mechatronics program. Both of those were huge additions to that program for where our industry in this area needs additional technically savvy employees in the future.
Fair enough. Thank you both. And Mr. Freed, there's no doubt our senior citizen population in this community is in need of property tax reform. And I certainly hope through some of the measures in being able to tackle what this policy committee has been able to educate me on in my first term. It's staggering, the numbers of people who, whether it's COVID related or whether it was COVID enhanced, we certainly need to get that population back to work in order to be able to afford the benefits that were promised to the senior citizens in their aging lives. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Eckert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You gentlemen all highlighted within your testimony, I think a central issue that we up here believe in is kind of get government out of the way and let us do our jobs. And we've seen an effort to reduce the corporate net income tax rate in a bipartisan manner. So I think we have an opportunity here to talk about a tax that really everybody pays, including businesses, most businesses, and that's the personal income tax. And as also part of that is that gross receipts tax, which is a tax on everyone's utilities. Things that every Pennsylvanian is paying, both individuals and most businesses are paying. I'm curious from your guys' perspective, what would a reduction in that tax do for your industries, for your families, for your businesses, in an effort to kind of, again, get government out of your life and to free up some money for some of those increased bills that you have coming down the pike?
I think you mentioned it well. We would prefer to keep the money on our side of the table and allow either us as a business to reinvest it into the appropriate employees and team members that we need to hire, invest it into the next project that continues to keep all of our trade partners working. I know our team members particularly struggle with housing costs, with making bills. Many of them are younger and having their first children and recognize a diaper bill or something new that they haven't had. So, you know, a couple extra $100 a year in their pocket is going to be reinvested into our local economy and see our economy grow, because they need that money to continue to support where they want their families to grow and where they would like to see their businesses grow.
As far as the earned income tax would go, again, that would affect everybody, but that would only affect the people that have earned income. One of the things that we spoke about was seniors on fixed income. They wouldn't benefit as much from that because they are seniors, they are retired. However, by adding the gross receipts reduction on electric bills, that would certainly have an impact on everyone.
Yeah, I think, you know, anything that reduces the costs. I mean, I was talking the other day about how I almost apologize when I give a price out for a new entrance in a building. Something that would have cost $5,000 and $6,000 4 years ago is up to $9,000 and $10,000. 40% increases on things. And, you know, as a business, we just fight all the costs that are hitting us. And that's what has happened. And so anytime we can reduce those costs, we can start reducing, you know, jobs, the cost of jobs, and then turn around, it helps the economy. I mean, it's just snowballs one way or the other. So.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate your feedback, and I know, you know, the folks up here are advocating for those reductions, and like I said, you know, the Senate took a vote on this, and it passed with a veto-proof majority over in the Senate. So this is a bipartisan issue. Hopefully, House Democrats will see the virtue in moving something like this for a vote and getting it to the governor's desk. I appreciate your time.
Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we've been going through the hearing today, and I appreciate your testimony, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. I took a minute to bring up the Souderton Area School District's budget, and from my rough back-of-the-napkin calculations, it appears that 75 cents on the dollar that's spent in the district is raised locally, roughly, and 24 cents on the dollar comes from the state. And then the difference comes from the federal government, that small, slender 1%. So we appreciate Uncle Sam. The superintendent mentioned earlier today that the federal government promised in the late 70s and the 80s to fund special education at 50 cents on the dollar, and that has not occurred. I really think the takeaway from today's hearing here, and Mr. Freed, you were kind enough to share your personal information with the committee here. You're paying $1,000 a month in property taxes. That's correct?
Yes, correct.
And according to the plan that's been proposed by the governor, you're being undertaxed.
That's how I understand it.
Yes.
I don't feel that way, though.
I'm sure you don't. So in a school district, that's really, Mr. Chairman, that's the takeaway from today's hearing for me, that the plan that's been proposed in Harrisburg for a resident of a school district that is paying 75 cents on the dollar for educating a child in this district, and the state is paying 24 cents on the dollar. An individual homeowner who's paying $1,000 a month in property taxes, the governor's plan says he's not paying enough. That's not a plan that's sustainable for the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Rowe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimony today. I think there's this misconception that taxes on businesses exist in a vacuum, right? You can tax businesses more or less. It doesn't matter because they're businesses. They all have limitless amounts of money, right? And that's how politicians like to paint it sometimes. But you have a real contrast here between the bill that Whip O'Neill and Chairman Kale has rolled out that would cut that personal income tax rate. And then we have a contrast bill that the House Democrats held a hearing on that would jump the personal income tax rate for small businesses from 3.07 to 12%. It would quadruple tax rate on small businesses. And I think it's important to point out what you referenced, that businesses aren't all taxed the same, right? You have the corporate net income tax rate, which was terrible in Pennsylvania. We had bipartisan agreement. We got that done. Now that's going to phase out, and that's fantastic, but that doesn't impact pass-through businesses, correct? They're still paying the standard PIT rate. So what does it mean for your consumers if you have a quadrupling of your tax rate, which is what the House Democrats have proposed, versus a cut in your personal income tax rate? Since you guys do pay that pass-through rate, you aren't paying the corporate income tax rate. You didn't get a tax cut. What does it mean for your consumers on the back end if you have a quadrupling of the tax rates?
I think it was adequately noted. We're worried about all the inputs and all the outputs that come into a business. And when something is increased, that means something else has to get impacted, whether we can't grow the business, we can't afford to add new employees, or for the industry I'm in, we're building houses. Everyone wants to know why houses are so expensive. Money's not going into the owner's pocket. It is due to the cost of the inputs in order to have the house constructed. That's a cost of input. That would be a direct, from a home building industry, that would be a direct hit to continued hit to the attainability of housing for people if you continue to increase the cost of the input.
Yeah, I mirror that, I mean, if you're in business and you're a good businessman, what you need to live and the costs that you have, it's the product you put out, and the product costs more, and that affects everybody. For whoever we're working for in our community, it affects them. So, the other side of that is seeing stuff roll back and not having those costs that we have to add to our product or add to what we're doing. Thank you.
The other problem with tax policy is business and the business community is pretty smart. It takes us a while sometimes to catch on, but that will just mean we allocate our resources differently. And if it's going to be taxed on income, then that money that would have otherwise been invested to an income producing may have to go somewhere passive, may have to go somewhere else. And the owners of the business would figure out how to do that, but then that could affect the ability for the company to grow and for future projects. So there is always a equal reaction to the, the initial reaction of tax policy, and it just doesn't always become apparent until after everybody's had an opportunity to digest it and then figure out what is my best course of action, because I have a resource that I have something I want to allocate. Where am I going to allocate it in what I believe is the best interest of that dollar, that $10, whatever it happens to be?
Well, I want to thank you guys very much for being the backbones of our Commonwealth, right? Our Commonwealth economy. You guys, small businesses, employ half the people that live in the state. So without you guys creating those jobs and that economic opportunity, Pennsylvania wouldn't be a great place to live and work. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to everyone that testified today. There's been a lot of, the discussion broadly speaking is about our tax structure in Pennsylvania and how it's important to basically strike a balance between keeping people in Pennsylvania, attracting people, keeping businesses here so that they can grow, but also being able to fully fund our schools. And one of the, Mr. Freed, you had mentioned in your testimony, and this is a piece of legislation that's been constantly introduced. I'm the co-prime along with Representative Marcel in this session, is a freeze, a property tax freeze for senior citizens. And I hear a lot from my seniors that they may not have had any children in the school district, or their kids are already grown, but every single year, maybe not every single year, but their taxes are going up, their Social Security is not matching that tax increase, they don't have a pension to rely on, they're maybe going to outside work to keep up with it. Can you speak just broadly, kind of in your experience as a tax collector, what you think that impact would have on our seniors, positive or negative, if there are negatives?
No, I think that would be a positive impact. Again, every time we send tax bills out, I get the phone calls. How can I manage this? What are the opportunities? And you look at some of these, like they'll bring in articles out of AARP magazine and say, look, all these things are available to seniors. And my answer is yes, but not in Pennsylvania. The other states have done that. There's a bunch of different programs. And the end result is, how do you get relief for someone who's lived in their home for 50 years? We base it on the value. The home has exceeded the people living in it. And it's taxed on the real estate, not the people in it. But we have to be conscious of who lives there, who's in our communities, and it's the senior citizens. And if you look at the communities that you're in today and some of that, they want to stay here. They don't want to go to a nursing home. They want to be with their families. We're fortunate that a lot of the families in this area still have family in the area. Their kids grow up, they come back here, they work here. They do not want to go anyplace. The one place that I mentioned earlier, the 55 and older, is Hidden Springs. That is a community that is modular homes. So that's a less expensive community. The amount of people and the turnover there for people just waiting to get in because of the affordability is immense. People want to be in this area. They want to be in their homes. So anything that would be a tax relief, whether it would be a tax freeze or an opportunity, would certainly be beneficial.
Well, thank you for that. And I think part of it is these seniors, especially in my district, and again, I think all across Pennsylvania, are being faced with making very difficult decisions right now. And it's prescription drugs, it's groceries, it's do they repair that roof that is leaking in the back room that they don't rarely go into anymore. So I think we're able to solve this problem. I think we're able to find a way to fund education, but also be able to give these seniors the relief that they need. But again, thank you all for your testimony today.
All right. Anybody else before I ask a few questions? Good. Thank you for testifying here today. I have two questions. One, I just kind of want some comments from our business owners. Mr. Weaver, I think you hit the nail on the head, something that we have been talking about a lot. When you look at a lot of the problems that we see across the Commonwealth, across the nation, quite frankly, with inflation, with the rising costs of everything, with people not being able to afford things because of it, it seems as though the source of these problems has been government. Whether it's the government dumping trillions of dollars into an economy, whether it's the government overtaxing because those costs just get passed through to consumers, which rises costs. And there's a number of other areas where you can say, well, the government interfering here with the regulatory system, the permitting process, how much that costs you all and your business, the engineering fees, all this stuff, government, more costs. And at the end of it, what ends up happening is the consumer ends up paying more, and then the consumer can't afford what's happening. And I just get concerned that in Harrisburg, we look at problems as though they're a photograph. And we can point out the problem and we just say, okay, there it is, let's fix it. And then we do something to try and fix it without looking at it like a motion picture where we don't see the reaction to what's going to happen. We're just trying to fix a current problem and then don't think about, well, how's this going to impact things down the road? We look at a regulation. Well, this is a good thing. It'll keep this, that, and that. We don't understand how this is going to impact the construction guy that's trying to do this and all the layers of regulations they have to deal with. As a general counsel, I had to deal with this in a lot of other contexts where, one particular law in a vacuum makes sense. But when you layer it in with everything else and with this, and it'll make your head explode. How are you supposed to be compliant? And I was somebody that was trained to keep companies in compliance. For small businesses that don't have that, it's just brutal. And the costs are rising and rising and rising. And I just would like your input on that. Is the answer here to scale government back, whether it's taxes, regulations? Would that create an economy, an environment where things would be more affordable, where the cost of living would go down?
I defer to him because, with building houses, the years that are spent trying to get a development up and going is a huge cost. And we see it, we'll have a job that's been promised to us. We bid on it. It's a contract job. And it'll go into a hold because of regulations. Something wasn't done right or somebody wants something different. So regulations really play, and yeah, you're right. On face, a lot of those regulations make sense, but how do you mix it up and not overkill somebody or overkill a job or overkill? But boy, the costs that they have to go through to get a housing development up and going is enormous. It's big.
Yeah, it's an interesting process. We could have a whole other hearing on this. I've talked to DEP about it. But from a residential land development standpoint, I will start working on a project and we will not see revenue from that project for typically 3 to 4 years from when I started working on it till when the first house is settled, and we will not see profit on it until possibly the last 2 to 3 houses in the development are completed. So there's a tremendous amount of risk, and this goes back to the comment of what you said. Government policy, government regulation is what it is, and it continues to add. There's very little, if ever, subtraction. The solution is always see the problem, as you said, the picture. I'm going to create a policy to fix that. That's an add. There's always something added. There's never a look at it and said, see the problem and say, well, if I subtract these 2 items and maybe only add 1, that might make it better. There's never a subtraction, and so it just continues to grow, and we've gotten to the point where some of it, the weight of the programs unto themselves almost make them ineffective. The amount of paperwork and the amount of documentation. I could preach on the stormwater issue for quite a long time, and I'm not going to go there on this. I promised I'd only talk about tax policy today. But that unto itself has a dramatic impact on the cost of housing, and it's a situation where the amount of paperwork we put in to prove that we are not polluting the adjacent stream could be reduced significantly and still have the same impact of the program. No one's saying we want to pollute. We just want to show how do we prove it in a way that is more cost effective, and then those dollars can be spent either to reduce the cost of housing or could go into investment into future projects. So it's the lack of subtraction that becomes a problem from a regulatory environment and tax policy.
And ultimately, it's the young family that's trying to move into this community that has to pay the price for all of these layers. Is that correct?
Well, just as an example, modern stormwater management. And yes, we are a far cry from the 1970s with where we are in clean streams law in this Commonwealth. And I'll be the first advocate to say that. But there is a happy medium on that. The cost to a new residential house is somewhere in the $50,000 to $60,000 per house higher for the cost for modern stormwater management. Now, that's an environmental good, and I get that. Government has to look at those environmental goods as well as the direct impact on tax policy. But all of that cost doesn't need to be there to reach the same result. And I think that's where the balance has to come in. Society does have to progress. We do have to do things better, but at what cost? And is there a way to subtract out of some of the things that we're doing to allow us to do it more cost effectively?
Yeah, what's remarkable, I come from Beaver and Washington counties and western Pennsylvania, right outside of Pittsburgh, west of Pittsburgh on the Ohio and West Virginia border. And what we're finding now, and that's an area that heavily industrialized, a lot of brownfield sites. It's an area where we are finding where we are having trouble in some portions of the area stopping pollution because we can't get permits to get projects done to clean up a site. It's outrageous. The whole thing has just become a total mess in a lot of different ways. I have one last question for you, Mr. Freed. The combination of you and then hearing from the school district today, I don't think it was intentional, but it creates this tension in what's being advocated, and it's a tension that I feel all the time because I agree, property taxes can get out of hand. There's things that we need to do. Representative Hogan talked about, Representative Schern talked about. I agree, there's things that we can be doing. But one of the issues that I always go back to, and you can help me understand this better, help us solve this issue. On the one hand, we don't want property taxes to go up or to go higher, and a lot of the times the answer is state funds, whether it's with education funding and school funding. But on the other side, when you see what's going on in Pittsburgh and Harrisburg, you see regions getting left out. You see winners and losers being picked. My concern is with eliminating, I know no one's talking about eliminating, but my concern with even reforming aggressively, and I think we should look into it because it's a problem across the entire state, but how do we do that, reform the property tax system, but also not have a system where Harrisburg is picking winners and losers? Because it seems like when Harrisburg picks winners and losers, there's always a good portion of this Commonwealth that gets hosed. And I'm just wondering if you guys thought through that issue as it relates to property taxes and property tax reform and state funds coming to regions across the Commonwealth.
Yeah, I don't know that I would have the answer, but it has to be more equitable. I don't have anybody that says, I don't want to pay my property taxes for the Southern Area School District. They're very proud of the school district that they're in. A lot of them moved here because they want to be in the Southern Area School District, and they want to pay their fair share. However, it's the continued increase, and when the school district has to balance their budgets, it's balanced on the taxpayers based on what other revenues are coming in. And as I shared before, when the economy hits, it affects everything, just like the transfer tax and that type of thing. So I think with Harrisburg picking winners and losers, that never works. There has to be an equitable funding. It has to look at everything, and we continually throw more dollars to the worst performers, thinking they're going to get better. That's not the answer. There's got to be a method where maybe you look at a Southern Area School District and find out what they did well, and they have the community support. And I think that you're right, it's a balancing act. I don't know what the exact answer is, but I certainly think some of the things we talked about today with the homestead, some of the freezing of that, will make it fairer for everyone. And that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about an imbalance. How does this get taken? An imbalance between the Saturton School District and the other school districts in the Commonwealth. An imbalance between how do seniors try and stay in their home, how does a new family try and get into the school district, and it's really trying to level the playing field. So I don't envy you trying to come up with a solution, and I hope as a collective group you can take some of the information you got today and use that moving forward.
Thank you. And what you mentioned about school districts getting basically incentivized for poor performance is exactly the issue we were talking about earlier as far as snapshots, where you just look at a picture and say this is what they need, you give it to them, you don't realize what the impact is going to be or what the consequence is going to be down the road. And it's not a good way to govern. You can never run your business like that. It's ridiculous, right? You have to understand how things react to a certain action. But we struggle sometimes in Harrisburg. We being not us legislators here, but it seems like elected officials in Harrisburg sometimes struggle with that. So thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate you all coming here. Your testimony was fantastic. Appreciate sharing with us. I'm going to hand it back over to Representative Schurn to give some brief closing remarks, and I'll give some remarks closing us out.
So I think it's very apparent, Chairman Gale, and I thank you once again for bringing this policy committee to my district, because the voices in my district were allowed to be heard, and that was something that was not given to me in the rush through due process in House Bill 2370, which is a strong basis as to why we're here today. The education bill, written primarily right out of the governor's proposal, silenced me, silenced my district, silenced the panel up here. And I do not believe any one member has the ability to silence the voices of another member's district. By pushing an 87-page bill through in 24 hours, the refusal for amendments to be posted or further discussion and input to be warranted is inexcusable. So voices in my district got heard today. And please keep in mind, I focused and brought it here to the Souderton School District because of the uniqueness of how they're being penalized. The irony in that, right? The three other school districts that are in the 147th, Boyertown, Perk Valley, and Pottsgrove, stand to gain some additional dollars. If they watch this testimony, and I certainly hope they do, the bottom line is the funding that they're looking to receive, does it come with conditions? Does it come with suggestions? Does it come with property tax increases? Does it come with provisions that will eventually only be a one-time infusement of cash? Will it be a shift in tax dollars from the suburbs to the cities? Will suddenly your $1,000 a month, Mr. Freed, need to go to $1,300 a month? Because Representative Rowe touched on the fact that a surplus is a surplus of funds that goes away. There's not revenue to replace that funding. There's no model in the governor's budget to replace that funding. It's not coming from any other sources other than just let's use it. And with that being said, certainly there's going to have to be additional votes on education. And I think all of us are committed to fully funding our schools. But if there's any takeaway from this hearing today, the governor wants to infuse $7.5 billion into the education system. And the people on this panel just feel there needs to be some sort of accountability. So any no votes that were put up are based on the fact that there's way too many questions that need to be answered in order to look out for the constituents of our districts. We're all toyed with caring about our districts first and foremost. Therefore, we deserve a seat at the table to figure out where that $7.5 billion is going to go. And how is that going to possibly be sustainable for years to come when we need to get our workforce back and we need to be able to afford our seniors to stay in their home? So I commend all of you for helping to give me a voice, which is something, unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle chose to say was not valued and was not warranted in the rush to pass that bill, which now sits in the Senate for further addressment. Thank you, Chairman Gale, sincerely.
Thank you, Representative. And it is amazing that we have gone from a system that seems to incentivize poor behavior with education funding to now entering into a system, at least in part, that is incentivizing poor behavior and punishing good behavior, which is a remarkable matter. But I think the overall theme of this hearing and what we heard today has been something that's been consistent, that this committee has heard really all cycle. We had a series of hearings, as you can imagine, Mr. Canavan, on permitting reform. and how that impacts everything, every industry, one of them being the housing industry and another one being the energy industry and manufacturing. And we've had hearings on parents having choices in education. We've had hearings on tax reform and other regards, not just the PIT tax. And we heard it again here today. If there was ever a time, I think, in our lifetimes where we need less government, it's now. And you could say it's a product of what happened in COVID. You could say it's because things got too out of hand with all the government going into the system, with all the money going into the system. But if there's ever a time for less government, it's right now. We need less taxes. We need people to have control over their own destiny. And we don't need more decisions coming out of Harrisburg. Certainly don't need more decisions coming out of Harrisburg dictating to you all and your local communities. I think this was just another hearing that clearly showed that and strengthened our resolve and conviction to advocate for that once we retake the majority. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing with us today. This series on the historic tax cuts will continue Thursday, June 20th. So anyone that's coming out to Cambria County, I believe, and then we're in Allegheny County on the 21st, another hearing there. But until then, this committee is adjourned. Thank you all.